Hello and welcome to Shy Hack Night number 421. Um, I am Joel Inwood and I'll be your host tonight along with...
I'm Claire Micklin. I'll also be your host. And we hope you will stick around after the presentation for a live Q&A and the Civic hacking portion of the evening, also known as breakout groups and introductions, which is literally your social time you're craving. We taking Q&A questions via our YouTube live chat. And as a reminder, our code of conduct will be strictly enforced, and we ask that you post respectful comments and questions in that channel.
All right.
All right, so looks like we need to kick off announcements. First announcement.
Announcements. Join the Shy Hack Night Slack. Sign up at slackme.shyhacknight.org. When it's not Shy Hack Night, that's where we all talk to each other. There's a lot of exciting places to find news, look for jobs, all kinds of good stuff. So join us on Slack.
Upcoming presentations. So 11:17, the post-election community discussion. Where do we go from here? And then 11:24, Thanksgiving. Unfortunately, there's no hack night on Thanksgiving. 12:1, Forrest Gregg, a hack night alum, and Casey Toner, the circuit.
Talking about the Circuit Court of Cook County.
Okay.
Yeah. Become a Shy Hack Night member. So we are a member-based organization, and we want you to join us. That's right. Even if you have already joined us, you probably need to join us again because it's that time of year. Becoming a member allows you to run for office on the board of directors. You can vote for policies and change our bylaws. You get to make decisions about what Shy Hack Night does. So if you would like to apply, just go to our website, shyhacknight.org/membership/apply.
It's a good reminder. I need to do that, actually.
I think I did.
Shy Hack Night. We also have a tech and data help desk. So if you would like some pro bono technology help, data assistance, if you're a person or an organization in Chicago, you can go to this form and make your request. So it's bit.ly/chn-help-desk, or you can even volunteer at the link that you see.
All right, Get Cities. This is a program that offers a paid 9-month experiential learning experience to help women and people, marginalized genders in tech advance their leadership and intrapreneurship abilities. Women, trans, non-binary Chicagoans in the first 1 to 5 years of a tech career are invited to apply. So go to pro.evalato.com/2677. And we'll put these we'll put the link to this stuff in the chat, and then also it'll be on the Slack. So don't worry if you didn't get it.
I see a nice butterfly and Bud Burst, a project of the Chicago Botanic Garden, and they want you to test an upcoming community science app. Let's see. Ooh, it's about climate change. So it's focused on using plant seasonal changes to answer questions about climate change. So beta test, and they want feedback on technical bugs, design, and functionality. So there you go. There's the link. I'll just let you look at it.
Post-presentation Zoom call. So tonight we're going to have our presentation, then we're going to do a Q&A, and at 8 o'clock on the nose, we're going to kick off a Zoom call where we all jump in and talk to each other. We do introductions, and then some of us, we have like a Civic Tech 101 if this is your first Shy Hack Night, although you may get some of that from our featured presenter. And we also have breakout groups where you can get together and work on different projects that folks are going to propose. You can sign up for a project someone's already got going, or you could introduce your own. But speaking of featured presenter, give a big virtual Shy Hack round of applause for Cyd Harrell. Hey.
Hi. All right. Hi, friends. It's so great to be here with you. I'm going to share a screen with a few slides just so that we can have something to seed our Q&A, which I am really, really looking forward to. Hopefully you are seeing a screen that says Solidifying Civic Tech, and somebody will send me a message if you're not. So it's an honor to be back here at Shy Hack Night. I've been a time or two before. And in addition to always having a great time when I come to Chicago, I'm always just incredibly impressed by the civic tech community here. So coming here, I want to acknowledge that I'm not giving you a one-on-one or anything like that, but I want to talk a little bit about us as a community as we enter this new decade at a difficult time in America with a potentially new federal administration and just lots and lots of change going on, and where I have some opinions about where we as a civic tech community may go from here, but I want to talk to you as well. So if you don't know me, my first city camp took place circa 2011 in San Francisco. And this post-it, which is blurry on your screen, says user experience, citizen experience. How to get ideas and data from the public, and how to get the design and research community to help. And I stuck this post-it up on the unconference board at City Camp SF in 2011, not really having an idea if there was a place for me in civic tech, or if I needed to be somebody who codes, or if I just needed to be somebody from a different background. And luckily for me, a whole bunch of people wanted to hear about how design and research could fit into what they were trying to do. And we had a great session, and I got excited, got more involved, and eventually came to work in this full time. And my How It's Going is from this year. This book came out in September, and it is my attempt to give us a starting place, an anchor, I hope, on a shelf of books that we as a field deserve to have and should have, and hopefully help new folks as they come into the field. So I think I was last here in August of 2014 when I was part of Code for America, and I think that Mike McGursky and I visited together, and we had a lovely evening and went out afterwards for a beer with Chris Whitaker and Elnaz and a couple of other folks who were there. So hi, if any of you are on the call, it's good to see you again. That wasn't my absolute first hackathon where I posted up the post-it. I was a little nervous, but I had been to ones where I hadn't dared to post up a post-it starting around 2010. And the first formal civic tech project I ever did was called the Field Guides to Ensuring Voter Intent, which is by the Center for Civic Design. And I helped work on a project about county election websites in 2012. Little knowing kind of how intense our focus on elections might come to be over the next couple of federal cycles. And that even more so hooked me into how we could help local officials who may often be resource strapped figure out how to use technology to serve the publics that they serve. But I got a real civic tech job the next year when I went to Code for America, and I served there as initially a UX evangelist, helping bring UX practices to folks in the network, whether on the city side or the brigade side or the fellowship. And later I was head of product there. And then I moved to 18F in 2016, thinking that it would be fun to see a presidential transition. And got as much as I ever bargained for on that front with the 2016 transition. Learned a lot from federal public servants about how they handle the bumps and bruises, in this case, of different administrations. After a term at 18F, part of which I was their chief of staff, I came home to California and started working with our courts. And I'm hoping if I have time, I'll tell you some stories about what it's like working in the judiciary. And here I am in 2020 with what I hope is a nice little book. So I get asked this question by everybody who isn't in it, and I don't really think that anyone on this call needs an answer to what is civic tech. But I've been trying to put some words together for us to express what we're talking about. There isn't one right way. But for me, I think that we, as a movement or a community or a practice or a field, we want to access services and exercise rights and build communities with all of the ease and respect that the best digital technology can afford. We want public digital goods as good as the ones made by commercial entities, if you want to put it another way. I really, really like this concept of public digital goods, and it comes from an essay by Ethan Zuckerman last year, which he mostly wrote about the media, but I think it's a very important concept for other kinds of public affordances and public institutions, from government to schools to the media to the law to a bunch of other places. And we want public digital infrastructure to be as good too. I reversed those. Ethan's concept is public digital infrastructure. Public digital goods has been used by other people. I'm trying to get my citations right. I feel like these are really strong statements of what we as a community or a field are going for. And we have a whole raft of types of project that we might be involved in. And I did a lot of work in the book just kind of trying to give people who might be new to the field some frameworks for, if you're landing in a place and you have an opportunity to do some civic tech work, what is it that you're looking at here? Is it a service delivery project where maybe you're working on the unemployment system, or maybe you're working on the swimming pool reservation system, or are you working on infrastructure stuff, getting data opened up and helping with APIs and databases, and even helping, as I know a lot of volunteer groups are doing during the pandemic, just helping government entities get Zoom set up or get calendaring set up so that they can do their work remotely. Government tools are another piece that people get really excited and involved in. And those are a lot of the product companies that you see out in the civic startup space. And then there's a lot of mutual aid and citizen engagement work as well, where we're trying to really serve a community, whether or not we have the participation of a government. I always think one of the toughest things in civic tech for people who are issue driven and want to work on something really specific is where in the government layers do you want to engage to work on the thing that you're excited about. So just looking at the difference between city and county, if you're not a unified government, which I think Chicago and Cook County are not, you have a split between who does transit and roads, who does building permitting, who does schools and libraries, who does vital records, who does different kinds of law enforcement, who does different kinds of parks, who does election administration. And if you were to move up and look at something like the federal level, if you're interested in benefits of one kind or another, you have something like food aid, which comes from the Department of Agriculture, gets granted to the states, mostly gets administered by the counties with the help of non-governmental organizations. And so one of the toughest things in civic tech, and I really love the work that groups like Shy Hack Night and the whole Code for America Brigade Network do in helping people find the entities that they can work with to work on the projects that inspire their passion. But I think they're, us techies sometimes just get excited about the tech potential, and in dangerous times or interesting times, if you want to go with the old sort of may you live in interesting times idea, we're living in interesting times, very interesting times. And it behooves us all to step back and think about, what do we want for society? What do we want to change because of the civic work that we're doing? Is there anything in the way of good change that we want to see? And we have to ask ourselves the question, is whatever's in the way solvable with the technology tools that we have? Or is it something that requires a political solution or a different kind of mechanism from the tech that we love? And here's where we come to dealing with policy. I have one chapter in the book about it, and obviously it's a field of study that people get PhDs in every year, and there's a whole industry around it. To put it in a brief way, policy is basically how government chooses to do things and what it chooses to do. So One example I like to talk about is cannabis policy. In 1995, marijuana was illegal for all purposes throughout the US. And after that, you started to see a number of states and sometimes just cities make it legal for medical purposes. And this slowly grew and shifted until over the last few years, you've started to see states and cities make it legal for adult recreational use as well. And there's been some wonderful civic tech work around expunging past convictions for marijuana offenses. But none of that works if you're in a place where the policy is that marijuana is a Schedule I drug and no one may use it for any purposes, and we will prosecute people to the fullest extent of the law. It doesn't even really work if active expungement isn't the policy of the government entity that you're working with. So we need a little bit of an understanding of policy as civic technologists. And in addition to the idea that we can't just patch a policy that doesn't work for us with good technology, it's important to recognize the power we have in that technology can be the key factor in the success or failure of a policy implementation. We saw an enormous number of failures of unemployment delivery for systems and states where the policy was in fact to bring aid to people who lost their jobs as part of the pandemic. But we had website problems, and we had database problems, and we had procurement problems where vendors were the only ones with the keys to the software, or we had really difficult to maintain software that didn't allow states and counties to change their systems in order to adapt to the $600 a week that more people were entitled to as part of the Pandemic Unemployment Association. It's not a pandemic Zoom call if there's not a cat, so this is Nutmeg. My apologies for her shouting. So seeing that though, we want to find places where we can act, where the policy already favors the work that we want to do. So the expungement plays are amazing plays in places where there's a DA who's open to expunging old convictions. Food aid has been a really fruitful area to work on in California, where it's explicitly the policy of the last couple of gubernatorial administrations that everyone who is eligible ought to be enrolled in a food aid program. So that means there's a lot of space for civic technologists to come in and say, well, if you make it really hard to apply, your policy is going to fail, and we know how to make it a lot easier to apply. It's kind of a list of ways to think about policy. You may find that what you want to do is against current policy, and that's a very tough situation. You may find a messy policy that isn't clear that might favor the things you want to do if you can work it out, if you're good at working with policy. The most favorable space for civic tech, in my opinion, is often where there's a clear policy that favors your work, but a terrible implementation, like bad forms and bad websites and databases that shut down because of an old contract that says they can only operate 18 hours a day. Those are incredible opportunities for us. A new administrator who's excited to work on your issue is a really good sign, and often harder than where there's a clear policy actually in place. So I call that like an exciting but cautionary situation that isn't quite as good as the previous one. And then here we are, we've got to decide what level of what you might call, the government stack you want to work in. We've been dealing with this a lot in our project with the California courts, where we're trying to help people who are pursuing civil cases without a lawyer. So civil cases meaning things like evictions, divorces, guardianships, pretty important stuff. Is our best play to write new content, to teach people how to do user research who already work in the system, or to do it ourselves, to create better templates and forms for people to use, whether that's the public or internal administrators, maybe to replace the publishing system that people are using, which starts to become maybe a significant tech project, maybe to better integrate databases or APIs so that we get less duplication and clearer transmission of data throughout the system. maybe the best play is to get the data, IT, and comms groups to actually collaborate in a healthier way. I would encompass all of this work in my definition of civic tech, even though one does not have to be a programmer or even sort of part of the recognized technology industry triad of engineering, design, and product to do it, which I think is kind of cool. It means we can welcome a whole lot of colleagues into this world of civic tech. So one of my last sets of questions, and then I want to tell you a quick couple judiciary stories, is trying to think about, where can we be most effective? Where can we both show and manifest the potential of technology to bring better digital public goods to everyone? Where could I act if I wanted to relieve the most pain for end users? What about for maintainers, or I sometimes like to think of them as stewards of public funds, public goods, public interfaces? Where can I act to make sure that my changes last maybe beyond a current administration or beyond a current project? And where can I act where I'm going to have access and support and every step isn't going to be uphill? So I'll leave you with that and tell a little bit of a story, and then I'm really excited to talk to you. So in June 2018, I joined the California Judicial Branch, and I was so excited because I felt like I could really say, I've done government stuff before, and I'm excited to work with you. So I tried that out on day one, and they said, so what? Why are you telling us this, lady? Possibly not in so many words, but with that look on a lot of people's faces, like, okay, you're from the government. And they said, well, we're not the government. We are the courts. And I was sitting in a state government building, talking to a bunch of people I'd been emailing with .gov at the end of their email addresses. And I thought, okay, this is one of those moments when there's something I don't understand. And the biggest thing that I didn't understand turned out to be that in a lot of cases before the court, the government, one or the other government, the state, some city, some county, is a party to the case. And so nobody in the court, with the court's really strong values of impartiality, is comfortable with the idea that they are part of the government that comes before them on a regular basis. In many other ways, it's a lot like working in the executive branch. But I had a lot to learn. And so here we are out in the field. This is in Fresno, California, with our research team. And I should note that we're not in front of the courthouse because the Fresno court has a local rule that you may not take a photograph in front of the courthouse or anywhere in it, which is an interesting local rule. But these are a few photographs we took in other courthouses of just kind of what it's like if you are a person doing a life impacting court case without legal representation. And there is an infrastructure to help you, but it's confusing and it doesn't feel very welcoming or nice. When you go kind of backstage in courthouses, you see this incredible organization and just stacks and stacks of paper and 20th century office tools like stamps and date stampers and staplers. Sometimes scanners, so a 21st century tool there, but there's a whole lot of just paper clips and things that you would have found on a desk in the 80s. We decided quickly that one of the best ways to get information out of court staff who weren't leadership, because courts are pretty hierarchical, was to ask them if there was a good taqueria nearby. And so we made a little side quest about getting tacos in all 58 counties in California. And we are at 24. So we've got a little ways to go, and the pandemic has slowed us down a bit. But it was a really important part of our research, not just to intercept people who were dealing with court cases in the waiting rooms, but to talk to the folks who do the daily work in the courthouse, as well as the attorneys who were really easy for us to talk to because people wanted us to talk to them. I learned a lot of new words. Some of these might be familiar to you. Access to justice is what A2J stands for, and the rest of these are either types of computer programs or a really interesting word for getting help. It's self-help, and it just means that somebody helps you who isn't your own attorney. But I find it just like we're not part of the government to be one of those fascinating little switches and entering a new area. So the reality is we are making a website, and that's not technologically innovative at all. And I find that not all, but quite a few of my best civic tech projects are not technologically innovative. And yet they bring the existing web mobile database API toolkit to challenges where they're really, really needed. So we're making a website, but that means we are installing and configuring a new Drupal CMS. We are building a full design system, which I am hoping to name Atrium, based on the US web design system. We've built an app to look up which of the 254 courthouses in California is the right one to bring your filing or your matter to, or where to get help. We've built a lookup for court forms, of which there are some 1,200. We've been helping build release processes, which didn't really exist, and instrumenting pages with analytics. And also, we've helped establish a web content attorney position where somebody with the authority of a lawyer who also understands the web is helping to write a much briefer and more plain language style of content than they've ever had before. We've also been reinforcing and helping build relationships between the central entity where we work and the county courts, building governance structures and getting a research program in place, and then helping procure software to support all of this. So it's a lot like a civic tech project anywhere, but every time I find I go into a new civic tech space, I get something like, "You're not in the government anymore. Why did you say that?" And after 8 years or so, I'm starting to enjoy it. I think working back towards what we want more of us. We want more people to be civic technologists. And of course, there's a whole lot of ways to engage. Everything from volunteerism to joining up fairly permanently for a term with a government digital team to working for one of the product companies or consultancies in the space, which there are more and more of, and which sometimes I think maybe now are crossing over to employing more people than actual government entities. And I think we want new civic technologists to be able to skip a few of our old mistakes and make more advanced ones instead. And that's really why we need a shelf of books. And I hope this is one of the anchors on it, but I hope that some of you out there will also write a civic tech book with what you know that you can bring to make this community richer and more knowledgeable and more capable. And it's a very hard year. So here we are. I understand that in addition to everything that's going on with the election and the pandemic, there was a tornado warning in the Chicago area tonight. So I thank all of you for your commitment in showing up. And I also just want to remind all of us to take care of ourselves and be a community. This is a long haul thing. I talk a lot in the book about this being a 50-year project. And if we want to count it as starting with the first hackathons in 2008, we're just kind of at 12 or 13. So we've got a ways to go, and we need to support each other and move together as a community. So I would love to hear your questions.
All right, that was great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So it is time for questions. And you can post just as a reminder, you can post your questions in the YouTube chat and we will put them in a little queue and hopefully get to all of them. So I'll start right now. So in the book, you talk about a bit about Agile versus Waterfall. Could you tell us a bit more about why Waterfall seems so dominant in government, or at least local government?
Oh, it's there in federal and state. I think it's because of the paper trail more than anything, and not just the paper trail. Like there's a clear sign off every time you pass something off in Waterfall, and everybody feels comfortable that it gets signed off. But I think also it's part of a bigger culture of kind of submit and review, where some people have authority and other people submit their work to them. And it makes collaboration really difficult because everyone's trying to polish things as much as they can before the big submission, when maybe they get an A or they don't, or, you know, and often those big submission processes don't come with useful feedback. So you get, you know, nope, this didn't make the bar, try again. And so those two things kind of go together to make waterfall fit really well. It's seen as a way of risk reduction. It's definitely quite true that in many government levels, you can get in a lot more trouble for not following the process than for having your project fail. So just a few of the reasons why waterfall is popular.
As a county employee, no comment. On to the next question.
Okay, I won't ask for one, but.
A member of our audience asks, in cases where the policy does not favor what you want to do, what do you think about civic tech's ability to tell stories and persuade in order to bring about policy changes?
I missed the first part of it. I heard the civic flexibility to tell stories, but civic tech's ability, sorry.
Yeah, in cases where the policy does not favor.
Yeah. What I think about civic tech's ability to tell stories.
And bring about change.
I definitely think it has some. That's kind of this whole showing what's possible strain of civic tech. And I worked on a project earlier this year that was explicitly about collecting stories from people trying to get unemployment assistance during the pandemic in order to rapidly share those stories with policymakers who are going to be working on what we hoped at the time was a next round of pandemic assistance, which of course was blocked at the federal level. But I think that is very important. And I don't know, sometimes there's a role for tech in storytelling and sometimes there's not. And so, yeah, so all those technologists who may or may not be building tech can also do this kind of story collection and storytelling work.
Right. In the book, you talk about how government forms are such a target-rich environment for civic tech improvement.
Yes.
If the number one bit of low-hanging fruit, what's number two?
Oh, that, I actually think it's government communications probably. If we could get every government agency accessible by email and SMS and answering questions with the technologies that people use by preference, which is not probably all that expensive, especially with so many government employees having gone to remote work recently. I think that would make a huge difference in the accessibility of government.
Wrote that down. Let's see. What was your process like to write this book? How did you decide what to cover and when to publish, etc.?
What the cover was and when to publish, and
I'm sorry.
Or what to cover.
What to cover, yes.
What to cover. I actually wrote my first outline in a taxi after the conversation that inspired me to write the book, which was a coffee I had with a friend right before the holidays last year. And it's not that different. That version had 12 chapters. There's now 13 plus an introduction and a conclusion, and I've moved a few things around. But a lot of the topics were the same. And once I came to the idea of, I want it to be kind of a grounding document where people who are in the field will be able to, see their work and maybe see some more structure around their work, but I also want it to be really accessible to someone coming new into the field. Then it was fairly clear that, well, I had to cover what the heck is it? And I had to cover what kind of projects you can do. And I had to cover how you can partner with governments. And I had to cover some of the really important mechanisms for doing that, like migrating legacy systems and procurement and bringing in user research. And I had to cover how the work styles are different and how you can make them go together. And then, of course, I had to think about like how to take care of yourself and how to make alliances. And so a lot of that was there early. And then I went through 3 rounds of editing. And that's after I had folks in the civic tech field read each chapter and give me comments. And I chose a developmental editor who is not a civic tech person, but is an editor of tech books. And so she relentlessly asked me questions, as I paid her to do. And that helped a whole lot with discovering the holes in my coverage. And my goal from the beginning, partly because of my sweet husband, who maybe will wave because he's actually in this room if he comes over here. I came home and I said, you know what? I think I'm going to write a book next year. And he said, and I told him about it, and he was like, that's a really good idea. You know what you should do? You should get that out before the election, because if we do get an administration change, a lot of people are going to want to go, come here, come wave. No, shy guy. A lot of people are going to want to go into this work. And so, you know, that would be a really good time for there to be a useful book about the topic. So I said, okay, I'll put myself on a schedule. I'll start the first weekend of January. I did not anticipate a pandemic, but I'm doing it on relatively easy mode because I have just one kid who's a high schooler and I'm able to work from home. So I did manage to mostly keep my schedule and get there.
Following up on the whole getting a job in civic tech thing, as someone who's currently job searching and interested in the civic tech space, any tips on red flags versus positive indicators to look for in potential employers in civic tech?
I think there's been a whole discussion on Twitter recently, and somebody was asking me about it earlier today. You know, there's all these people saying, you know, don't be too tech forward, don't be too arrogant. There's something to both of those, and asking questions about that in an interview. You know, how do they think that change gets made? What's their position with or in partnership with the organizations that they work with? And I think the other thing to watch out for is whether it's going to be a real intense sweatshop situation and whether that suits your current personal circumstances, because that can definitely happen with civic tech places. And so figuring out, you know, are they in a space where they have communities of practice within the company? Do they have multiple people within your discipline that you can learn from? Might they have mentorship? You know, do they kind of participate in spaces and offer community that's supportive for you? Those would be positive signs, I think. And if you're newer in your career, if they have some formal mentorship or apprenticeship structures, that's a really good sign.
The good stuff. Let's see. So we have a follow-up. I think Eric wants to write a book. He says, advice for us writing similar books. What should we write about and what did you miss?
I mean, I really didn't talk all that much about the actual technology. So that whole space is wide open. And I think books from a non-majority perspective would be extremely welcome. I'm very aware of, you know, my privilege as a senior white woman. So books from other perspectives, I suspect, would be amazing and do really well. Yeah, more technical ones. I think, you know, there's room for specific ones about local or specific ones about federal. There's room for narratives and histories. There's room for more detailed how-tos about particular subjects. I mean, you could write a whole book about migrating legacy systems in government or about helping governments get better at procurement if those are areas that you have a strong background in.
Okay. How were you able to push for all the changes you mentioned during your experience in the California courts, and what were the challenges to getting buy-in for these changes?
We have an interesting contracting vehicle that's supporting us, so that we were brought in kind of as temporary senior labor. And it's one of these weird government things where the state contracts with 8 specific agencies and you have to work through one of them. And it took like ages for the contracts to get done. But it let us be both inside and outside. So we had a conference room back before the pandemic. That was sort of our workroom where our 5-person team all sat. We were in the building. We weren't invited to all staff meetings and so forth, but we were embedded in a way. But we also got to take that consultant perspective. We have T's next to our names and our email address for temporary so that nobody tells us anything super secret. And we made an agreement. Some of you might know Jack Maddens from Code for America if you worked with the peer network or the brigade. So he's my primary project partner there. And we made an agreement that we would really work on partnership and we would ask for space to talk to everybody. So our first 8 months, we didn't launch anything. It took 8 months to get to a pilot of a courthouse lookup. And that was a lot of touring courthouses and showing people ideas and showing people mini prototypes and helping people with whatever they might have needed help with, and showing up and not embarrassing ourselves in meetings with judges so that people knew that it was okay if they introduced us to judges. And not wearing shorts to the courthouse, and just like there was a lot of like, okay, who are you guys? Are you going to be people that we think are okay to recommend? And so we just spent a lot of time establishing that through lots of conversation, but also, we had enough capabilities. Like we can build a little page for you to show you something. You might even be excited if we built a nice PowerPoint that had some links in it. So we started some of the showing what's possible, like movement, while also working on relationships. The barriers have been that none of us are attorneys. And that's just a thing. And so when coming down to recruiting an attorney who was really web-minded, that really gave our team wings, because we're just, I can understand the basics of some legal issue, but I can't speak to all the details with the authority that somebody who's got that training can, and that's fair. And then I think other barriers are that the stuff we wanted to do was just so different from the way that they were used to thinking about using tech and using digital. Their web team before was a kind of service team where you send requests and they do them and you get mad at them for not doing it fast enough. And it's not people who ask you questions, it's not really people who partner with you. So we've been doing a lot of work too with them to become the people who take that posture and support you and ask you questions. We are 2.5 years in, so it's been some time.
How much COBOL do you know now? No, that's not.
0, 0, 0. It's more, it's more bad early 2000s CSS that I've been needing to pick up.
Fair enough. I have an actual real question. What's the most interesting or memorable thing you learned about federal administration transitions when you worked at 18F?
So I guess I was maybe one of the few people who wasn't surprised at the role that the GSA administrator plays, because they were, looking for people to volunteer to support the transition team in 2016, shortly after I joined. And I wasn't eligible because I wasn't in Washington, or I would totally have checked it out. And I'm sure even more so felt like I got everything I bargained for in learning about transitions. But I think the thing that I've taken with me the most is the way that career federal staff talk about them. There's the Hatch Act, of course, which has been, we could say, honored in the breach by the Trump administration, which says that federal employees can't be political in their capacity as federal employees. So after Trump's election, when most of the San Francisco office was heartbroken, we took our badges off and left the perimeter of the building in order to go and talk about our feelings, in order to be careful about violating the Hatch Act. But the way that career staff talk about it is they'll say things like, well, I was talking to someone at the Department of Labor who I was teaching some Agile skills to, and he said, well, yeah, The previous administration really favored workers' rights and, wanted to build a lot of things to do that. We think that the current administration is more likely to favor enforcement. And so, they'll do things like that. That's what we saw with the Bush administration. They do this kind of current administration, previous administration favors and so forth without, the personal investment that isn't appropriate as a bureaucrat unless things come to a really extreme situation. And I learned a lot about the value and power of that.
Okay, my turn. You mentioned getting tech folks, communications folks, and subject matter experts to work together. How does one jumpstart that?
Being very friendly and getting them together with some kind of purpose, and ideally some kind of tangible thing that they can do together. So sometimes like building little decks or doing strategic exercises where everybody uses Post-its or something. There's lots of different facilitation ways to do it, but starting to normalize, and usually this means like, I'm going to go meet with the communications people, and then I'm going to go meet with the tech people, and then I'm going to go meet with the subject matter experts. I'm going to say, what, you should really meet with them. Could I facilitate a meeting between the two of you? And then I'm going to hold that meeting. And then I'm going to say, well, you should really meet with them. Then I'm going to hold that meeting. And then maybe we all three get together. It's like a lot of social work, but also providing a thing that they can collaborate on can be very cool.
All right. Let's see. What's your assessment of the career path at this point? For those of us with significant civic tech experience and some stories to tell, what are your suggestions for the gaps in the bookshelf?
The career path and the gaps in the bookshelf? So I think the career path is pretty bright. There are a lot of places to work. There are a lot of places to work in government and more places to work outside of government. And I'm hearing recently of people trying to build some stable infrastructure, for example, for campaigns, which is another area where the tech situation is really not great. So there's a ton of career paths. Some people go back and forth between the public and private sector. I think that is great. I also think sticking it out for a couple of decades is great. There's as many career paths as there are people. Gaps in the bookshelf. It's an empty bookshelf. There's only a couple of other books. So it's mostly gap. I would read a book, I know of a book being written about a sort of an alternate history of USDS and 18F. I would read a book about the history of Shy Hack Night and the volunteer civic tech movement of the late 2000s. I would read a book about what happened to Government 2.0. I would read a book about, access to justice tech, because that would actually help me directly. I would read a book about, convening emergency management folks across cities. I would really read a book about good government forms, because I'm not that good at it, but I know it's a key mechanism. So I guess there's a lot of opportunities for books, in my opinion. I'm hoping, so I don't know if all of you know, I self-published this, partly because of the timeline. Tends to take 1.5 to 2 years to publish a book with a publisher. And partly because I didn't think there was a publisher whose list it necessarily fit, or who would see kind of what the point of the book was. And so I'm hoping that the fact it's selling pretty decently. It's about somewhere north of 2,500 copies so far, across the different formats. And if it that's in 2 months. So things will trail off, of course. There was some pent up demand. But books that sell multiple thousands of copies in a field are something that you can tell a publisher about, and they can say, oh, yes, I might be able to figure out how to make money and market a book like that if there's a market out there for a previous book. So I'm hoping that it has something of that effect too.
Okay. Can you say, a little different tack, can you say something about effective and successful cultural intelligence and communication in the civic tech space?
That is the bedrock of civic tech. I think it's the bedrock of getting anything done. It's an incredibly valuable skill, whatever your technical skill might be. And if you don't even have much of a technical skill, if you've got that one and are willing to work on forums or talent or one of the more accessible technical places, you probably find a spot. I think, yeah, listening not just to users, which is kind of my core discipline, but to stakeholders and government staff, and trying to understand the situations in which you find yourself, in which the public finds ourselves as a public, because we're both, is one of the top things you need to sort of, see what's a political problem, what's a tech problem, what's a political problem or a policy problem that tech can help with. All of that kind of, there's a product management kind of analysis, and then there's the communication and persuasion part of that. Sometimes I find you have to do things a bit more formally in government than you might in the tech industry, in terms of, we're just going to write down a plan. We're going to say it's changeable, but yes, we'll write it down. It's fine. Or we're going to do a little more formal PowerPoint. The good news is the standard of PowerPoints is not high. And so you all can probably make a nice enough one in your sleep to pass as kind of fancy in a government environment. I hope Joel isn't mad at me about that. But.
Yeah, I do a lot of PowerPoints. They love it.
And if you can like do things like put GIFs in a PowerPoint,
oh, mind blown.
That's fancy. Yeah. Which is great. It's like, if that gets a little, if that level of razzmatazz gets a little attention for what you're doing, cool.
I think we got time for one more. This one comes from the professor of civic tech at the University of, or UIC, Stephen Kleinschmidt. Are civic technologists focusing too much of their professional development on tech hard skills? Do they need more understanding of policy, administrative processes, and government ethics to be effective?
I'm going to say a straight yes on both of those. And I am certainly still learning on the latter as well. But I do think it's often a good play for somebody to build a solid tech skill set for a few years and then pick up some of that.
Great. Guess we ran up the time for questions, so and we've got
Thanks for all the good ones.
Oh, there's a lot of good questions.
There's
some that haven't been answered, so that might be the
There are some that haven't been answered?
Yeah, so
all right, I'm happy to pop over for a bit.
Okay. So people still have questions. Sid will be in our breakout session for a little time, and we have need dinner, so we'll let you do that too. But yeah, more questions. You can, that's the plug to move over to our next session in Zoom.
Josh, you want to throw up the link to the Zoom? Well, we'll be meeting at we'll be on Zoom at Shy Hack Night. No, we got it. We got it. There it is. bit.ly/chn-remote-zoom. That, and we'll put that in the chat also. So we're gonna start heading over there right now, but don't worry if you need a minute, bathroom break, grab a drink, whatever, that's fine. We'll get going at like 3 or 4 minutes, 5 minutes after. And I think that's the last thing.
Yeah.
Claire, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. Okay. Just a couple. Let's see. Tonight's broadcast will be posted in the coming days on our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again. Okay. So stay safe, take care, and
go
forth
and
hack. It's very hard on Zoom. Okay, thanks everybody.
go.